Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Dr Berge and I'm your host. I'm the author of 11 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, most importantly an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. And of course, most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically behind how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. My work includes everything from mitigating injuries to conditioning behaviors that set a player up long term for the long game towards that top 10 tennis ranking. I am behind theories from the optimal performance theory, optimal behavior for optimal performance, the barrier breaker, the rule of transference to the golden rule. As has become custom, each episode we dive into one of my books to share additional insights and dig a little bit deeper. We've been focusing on the secrets to optimal performance success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players. With well over now 30 episodes to date, we have come such a long way. Today's topic plays its own role, like so many other episodes, in developing the player, parent to coach, and that road ahead towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for tuning in. Look, if you've been with us from the very beginning, today's a day to be excited about because we are actually up to the final chapter of this book, which is, I'm astonished in the best possible ways. If you are only just joining us, boy, have we come a long way. So I would encourage you after today's episode to track back because there's so much just good stuff there on the secrets to optimal performance success. And the best part is you can really flick through, dive in as you please, because at the end of the day, Beyond Top 10 Tennis is there for you, especially if obviously that objective and your end goal is to not only secure that top 10 ranking. You may be 900 in the world, 200 in the world, or at your local club or academy, yet to even have a ranking point. Or you could be inside the top 20 wondering what that key secret is, that missing link to cross that threshold into the top 10. It's all there. Over obviously the 11 books now to date, but the episodes that have been shared, they really give an insider's perspective and those just additional insights to really push the marker further. And look, today's episode, we've made it all the way to chapter 6, and it's about proponents of best practice. And that's obviously what this chapter's all about. So the next couple of episodes are really going to be diving into the other side. So not necessarily the technical side, let's say the personal side and the best practices that underpin that. It's something that is often overlooked. One of the fancy words we use in the coaching to the educational context is pedagogy. So specifically a coach's pedagogy. And I've touched on that previously and obviously in previous episodes, but it's essentially, think about it as your moral compass. There's obviously a lot more packed into that, but think of it just as your ethics, your values, what underpins your practices, what informs it, and obviously that goes into it. A lot of my work focuses also on what an elite coaching pedagogy is, and ironically, but maybe not so much, is that there's a direct correlation with coaches inside the top 10. That's another discussion because that digs a lot deeper, and it's currently the book I'm writing that's underway, and I have tapped into that in the last couple of episodes, because we are getting to the finishing product sooner in the next couple of months, though it's that time that it gets quite exciting. So obviously if you're listening, you have additional insights, which is quite exciting. Look, let's get started. If you want to follow along, we're on page 206, but today's topic is mentoring and its tie to athlete success. And look, as has become custom in each episode, we really value, and I love looking at and making sure there's that humanized approach. And this has to be one of the best episodes to tie that in, because at the end of the day, coaches, we're all human. Players, athletes, we're all human. And there's obviously, tennis is just one part of life. Sure, it is for the professionals out there, it's your career. For the aspiring players who are still in some form of school or educational context setting, it's still, again, a part of, not all of, so to speak, which essentially means that there are other parts of your day that are incredibly valuable. And it is so important when we're looking at mentoring, its applicability for the tennis player and or that coach and their role, and for the parents to be mindful of this, but also in life. So for the others out there, and I say others loosely, so the parents and let's say anyone else who's not, I think, in essentially saturated within the tennis context. So for the non-players and or the non-coaches, so to say, mentoring is so valuable from a career's perspective as well, whether you're earlier in your career or later on in your career. Maybe you actually mentor others. Those of you who have been following along or who have taken a peek at my background, currently I am chairperson for an organisation, and complemented by that over the years, I've also mentored a number of athletes, too many to name, but in the best possible context. And that's from another side, so from a professional endeavour, career standpoint and educational setting, not just when we're looking at obviously elite performance metrics and developing obviously that top 10 tennis ranking. There's obviously a lot that goes into my background, but to get to unraveling that top 10 tennis ranking. And one of my latest books, The 7 Keys to Optimize Your Life, use tennis as that blueprint to really unlock, if you like, the correlation between excellence, so the 1% in the real world, and obviously that 1% in the sporting world. And obviously we can look at that 1% as that top 10, because if we're looking at a scale of 1 to 1,000, for example, and we really want to hone in on just the select group of players who are heading towards and or inside, and obviously it's a very rough figure. It's a nice, I think, number that people can resonate with. It's just as applicable in the real world to where that humanized approach comes into play. Okay, to dig a bit deeper into mentoring, I am sure if you're a coach out there, you've obviously heard of this word, and parents just the same. Though for the players or athletes, it's so important that when you are choosing a coach, whether that's your current and or new coach, there really is that mentoring element there, and it really does play a role in performance success and obviously the specific metrics that lead towards those peak performances. And as we've touched on previously, they're cyclical, which means you peak and then you'll drop again, then you'll peak and then plateau, then peak again. So recall one of our most recent episodes on periodization that really touched on that. So I'd encourage you to take a bit of a deep dive into that. But when it comes to mentoring, it really crosses over, because you need that coach to be mindful of preparing you for those peaks. And you get there by having those conducive discussions that are two-way. One of our earlier episodes was on the coach-athlete relationship, so the inner workings there, which essentially means you get along and you're comfortable exchanging different, whether it's tactics, informations, the tweaks, etc., and mutual respect is there. And I can't stress that enough, that respect is not just one way. This is something that's probably often overlooked and or forgotten. I think it's very typical or common for the players, the athletes out there, when it comes to respecting the coach. But it's so important for the coach to reciprocate that with their players, their athletes that they're working with. Likewise, obviously, for the parents and or guardians that play a role, recall the triangular relationship and the benefits from the coach and parent and or guardian being able to have those discussions to help obviously amplify then the player's performance and how it's all interworked. Okay, so again, if you want to follow along, let's get started. Mentoring in sports coaching is often overlooked, yet such a core ingredient to coaching and athlete success. As coaches, and whether you like it or not, you are role models. Coaches are expected to lead by example. A lot of coaches unfortunately forget this. This is so important, and I know I've touched on this a while ago now in this respect. However, I cannot stress this enough, that coaches, you are role models. And we've had those discussions, for example, around social media and being friends with your players, and then the coaches out there, you have a really big night and all those photos end up on your social accounts, and then your players end up seeing that, and you just really need to ask yourself if you're setting a good example. When those lines become blurred, we know that role model status is kind of going out the window. So it's so important to be mindful of this, and it's the same for the parents. Parents and or guardians, it's so important. I'm sure it's common knowledge, so to speak, that obviously your child and or children do look up to you. You are role models in one way, shape or form, and the same applies. However, obviously we really want to narrow in from that coaching context, and sometimes those lines are blurred, where the coach-athlete relationship turns into a friendship in some way, shape or form, and it can almost be encouraged to have too much fun. That's obviously publicized, that the player athlete obviously can see, opposed to keeping that coaching, so that professional life separate from your personal life, which I think is incredibly important. Obviously, this is going to vary depending on that context, because we obviously do have coaches out there who are the parents as well. And so I'm sure you're well aware, hopefully, of this discussion and I think the boundaries in place in this context. However, for the coaches out there who are in the majority, who are coaching the players and athletes who are not their child, this goes for all the coaches at the clubs, the centres around the world, and obviously the countless number of players who are aspiring to head towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So you've got kids that are, 800 in the world, 600 in the world, they're progressing to 100 in the world, to 80 and so on. There's a very small percentage, obviously, that have their parents as their coaches, but if that is the case, it's still just as applicable. But it's a different dynamic, I'm sure we can all appreciate. So I really want to focus here on the non-parents that are coaches, who do typically make up the significant majority. And that is obviously where we can look at potentially those friendship lines forming. But there's a very big difference between respecting and the mutual respect to that friendship. It's not that friendship is not encouraged, but it's making sure the professional is separate to the private, and being very mindful of that as well. As a firm believer that if you aren't prepared to lead by example, you are unable to acknowledge your influence in your athletes' players' lives, and therefore you shouldn't be coaching. Coaching just isn't for you. Now, I know this is a super incredibly hard stance, but in my opinion, that it's true. And I will say my informed opinion with all the data behind it, and from the countless number of players and athletes I've worked with and coaches indirectly as well to overseeing, this is so incredibly important. I cannot tell you how often, and it's so popular, that this lead by example is not the case. But also, it's the opposite, where you have coaches who are so hard on their players, where that mutual respect is not there. It's almost intimidating. And again, I've seen one too many coaches, predominantly male coaches, unfortunately, who take that intimidating stance, who could be likened to that father figure, making sure their child behaves when they're being more firm, and I acknowledge the stereotype, and that is not conducive to an optimal performance. And unfortunately, these players, athletes that do have coaches like that end up leaving on the simple premise that they do not feel comfortable around that coach because they cannot have those welcoming discussions. The respect is not there. Rather, that coach almost demands it, in contrast to making sure that player athlete feels comfortable and that can have those discussions. There's a very fine line there in making sure athletes obviously understand boundaries for the simplifying reasons, compared to being overbearing and over demanding. That is not conducive for a performance. And it's really important to highlight that, because again, we're looking at the role model here, and a role model obviously leads by example, and they acknowledge their influence. And when we're looking at influence in itself, having that person who is very demanding and is not welcoming, who is not approachable, every coach out there does not know what that child experiences at home. Hopefully it's all good, but in the real world we know that's not the case for everyone, and that's obviously opens another can of worms. But that's why it's so important to acknowledge that you are a role model and that you can make yourself available to have those discussions for the coaches out there with your players, athletes. Obviously for the parents and or guardians, just as applicable, but that's why it's so important to have that coach in your child's life that they can have those conversations with. I cannot tell you how many children athletes who have had those conversations with me over the years, and things that their parents weren't necessarily aware of, or they did not want to have those discussions simply with their parents and or guardians, because at the end of the day, for the parents out there, you're their parents and or guardians. It's that simple. So a coach can be very powerful in respect to being viewed by that child, that player, that athlete, almost as that aunt and or uncle, so to speak. And I say that very loosely speaking, in respect to that they may look up to you. And obviously this is going to differ from everyone's individual interpretation of those experiences. If it's positive and for safekeeping, I'll say the definition I'm intending behind that aunt and or uncle is really just that safe space and or that person you can talk to without judgment. It's that simple. But from an adult's perspective, you may feel like they're the shoes you're stepping into. And if you're able to get to that point where you are approachable, you are still obviously implementing the 7 keys. Obviously, those links obviously are at and available at AMA International. I won't go into detail now. But if you're implementing them, and you are approachable, you do have that mutual respect, you understand that peak performance and those metrics that you're working towards, you're on track. You are following the pathway, hopefully you're following the long game, and obviously that first 10 years of play towards that second 10 years of play. And that's what it's all about. So I know it almost seems like mentoring is this huge topic, but it's really simple. It can be so simple in respect by leading by example, acknowledging the influence that you have, and essentially respecting that influence. In particular, when you are around children, whether they're 8, 9 years of age or 18, 19 years of age, it doesn't matter. It is the same because they're just as impressionable. So that's another can of worms, so to speak, where we can look at child behavior, human behavior, athlete development, which is really interworked within this body of work, and it is discussed inadvertently throughout these texts, and specifically this one, The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, because at the end of the day, coaches are working with children. And whilst I think, irrespective of where you are based in the world, a child can be looked at from 13, 14 and under, for example, and or through to 18, and then it cuts off, for example. But I'm going to disagree, because you still as a coach have that influential impact on that person who, obviously, if you've been coaching them for some time, they're still a child in your eyes. And so to the players and athletes out there, if you are 16, 17, 21, I may still refer to you or view you as a child simply because I am older, but because I've been in your shoes, and I'm sure there are coaches at the same. But at the same time, I also acknowledge if you are one of the older ones, you are a young adult, but that does not strip me of my responsibilities as a coach to maintain that mutual respect and to maintain my awareness around my role model status, because believe it or not, irrespective if you're 20, 21, 24, 26, when you have a coach in that power relationship, because essentially that's what it is, and I've written about that quite extensively, it's so important to be, again, mindful of that. And I know I'm saying mindful a lot because we just need to be very conscious of our actions. So irrespective of your age, if you are past that developmental phase and or age range, you are still impressionable by that person and or those people you may view as a role model, so to speak. And that was very loaded, and that was a lot, and we went on a lot of tangents there. And human behavior gets me very excited because it is so important and fundamental, and it's interworked when we're really looking at the scope of performance and how to get there, how to get to that top 10 tennis ranking. It's all either directly or indirectly associated with human behavior and those that you are around and those influences. So especially for the parents and or guardians out there, it's so important your child has a good role model. And for the players, athletes, you deserve a good role model that can lead the way, and that is incredibly powerful. And I'll just backtrack slightly when I did touch on that power tussle in respect to a power-based relationship. And what that essentially means, for those who are not familiar in this context, it's really looking at likened to, say, the parent-child relationship, where the adult essentially has all the power compared to the child. So the coach has a lot of power because they're the adult and they're the ones with the tools to get that child to that top 10 tennis ranking, potentially, if they are conscious of the 7 keys and they are integrating them each and every lesson. Underscore, cannot stress that enough. If they are not, that's another thing. Maybe they are just good for this developmental stage and or this period or point in time for your performance progressions. So when it's essentially acknowledging that mutual respect is paramount to be able to have those conversations, because if that power is evident, really present in that coach-athlete dynamic, it's not healthy, because you want to even out that power. The best coaches will give that power in part to their athletes, to their players. So it's shared. It's a shared responsibility, and that is so important. That is not typically seen, and that is why not every player will progress towards the top 10. And that is one of a human behavioral trait, opposed to a technical metric and or a performance-based metric that obviously are both correlated with that outcome. They work in tandem. So you could have the best technical prospects, you could be implementing specific movement parameters, but if that other side, that behavioral side, does not correspond, so it does not correlate with where you're going, and it's not conducive to your performance, you will suffer. Which means for those out there who think that they have an exceptional game, you could be ranked top 50, top 40 in the world, and you're wondering what's stopping you. Have a look and really review the 7 keys yourself for the players or athletes. Get your coach to review them with you and integrate them progressively if you want to ascend closer towards the top 10. If you are one of those players, those athletes currently at a local academy and or club, you really still want to be able to have those discussions, but twofold. Performance-based, so on-court performance-based, but then we can look at the behavioral side, the influence. And this really does come under, and it is wrapped amongst that mentoring proponent, because mentoring in and of itself is essentially what the coach is doing when you're not on court. Obviously on court is coaching, but off court is that mentoring component, which is so powerful in itself. Okay. The responsibility of influencing the athletes and players of tomorrow is something every coach is responsible for, and the impact of coaches' influence on an athlete or player's life years from now is undeniable. Consequently, the responsibility that comes with coaching should be taken seriously. And this is really important. I'm sure for the adults in the room and listening, you have memories, hopefully positive, of your time with your coach when you were younger. And this is what I'm referring to, that it's impressionable, imprintable, you remember it for an extended period of time, if not the rest of your life. And so you want to make sure they are positive. I personally have many positive, but unfortunately I do have negative ones in there as well. And this does not change as you get older. A couple of months ago even, I had a negative experience. So irrespective of where I'm at in my career and what I've accomplished, there is still negative influences out there or negative people out there, that you really want to be cautious when it comes to that role model status, that you don't view them in that context. Unfortunately for me, my negative experience was meeting up with a former coach from when I was younger. So when I say younger, under 10 years of age, and their behavior towards me, unfortunately, as an adult, was not the best in this respect. So it really made me rethink how I viewed that person from when I was a child, from a positive role model status, and I really had to tap into human behavior, so recall the humanized approach, and that's not the case now. Unfortunately, they were negative, had a negative impact, and it's removing that influence, and that's a very complicated, and hopefully that's not the case for those of you out there. However, on a more positive side, another coach I did have when I was, I want to say 10, 11, 12 years of age, for example. I have, and I do occasionally bump into this person periodically, and we have the best relationship. It's mutually respectful and it is wonderful. And for me personally, this former coach is almost like a father figure in the best possible way. And I'm saying that to those of you out there who are the players and athletes, that the potential is there to have incredible coaches that may be in your life for the next 10 years. They may pop back in your life in 10, 20 years, but it doesn't matter. But it's so powerful when we're really, moving the conversation to this positive influence, that's the potential. And especially when you're looking at the role of mentoring and it's tied to athlete success, the positive outweighs that negative. Thankfully, I've got both, and not essentially that I'm thankful for the negative experience, but I'm thankful that I have that positive, so I have a baseline to be able to have that conversation to say, you know what, even though this person changed into a negative role model, so I'm going to remove them from that role model status, so to speak, I still have that positive one who's been through my life through an extended period of time, and where they've just popped up and I've bumped into them, and it's been wonderful. And that's what I really want to make sure the conversation's about, because for the coaches out there, and if you're not conscious of your influence, you could potentially have that negative influence. And I really hope if you're listening, that's not the case. If you have had a negative influence, unfortunately, please reach out to that player, that athlete, and be the bigger person. Because again, if you are that role model, they deserve that, because at the end of the day, they're children and they're players, they're athletes, and you were impressionable at some point in time. And so that's what it means to be a good role model, is obviously owning up to mistakes, learning from mistakes. And that's another episode that we've really touched on more recently, and that's probably very powerful to refer back to. But more so, when you're looking at mentoring, the discussion, again, I will give that personal example of this specific positive coach. They have been a very positive mentor, whether it has been specifically performance-based, but more so professionally based, as they've been a point of recall, in a manner of speaking, to simply have conversations with in the best possible light, that are mutually respectful and are wonderful. And I'm sure hopefully a lot of you out there know what I'm referring to, but I wish that for every player, athlete out there, because there are, and I do have unfortunately examples of the negative ones. That's just one. But the positive, for the coaches out there, being that positive is incredibly powerful, and I hope that's what you aspire to be. Because at the end of the day, if coaching is your profession, you're going to work with hundreds of players throughout your career, I am sure, and if not already, and if you are working with just one player at this stage, for example, inside the top 100, I am sure you've worked with many more prior to this player. So the point is your impact, your influence, and that if you are in the top 20, for example, with your athlete, your player, your former players may see you, may view you, so it's how you hold yourself as well. So that's that influence, that's that role model status. But when we come to mentoring, it's the off court, it's the conversations you make yourself available to be had, and that's so incredibly powerful. And it can be likened to guiding that player athlete through their next steps, whether you are a part of those next steps or not. For example, you may be an exceptional developmental coach. You may get them through their first 10 years of play that we have discussed on multiple occasions, but you are not equipped for that second 10 years of play, for example. So that player, that athlete may opt to go with another coach, and you may even help them find that coach that is the best fit for them. But irrespective, that is where that mentoring element comes into play, and they will thank you and be grateful for you for the rest of their life for that positive part you've been able to play. All right, back to it. Too often over my play and coaching career, I have seen countless coaches, and perhaps more than I'd like to share, who have not taken mentoring seriously. By seriously, I mean taking responsibility. Taking responsibility for their level of influence, and not merely the imparting knowledge they have to share, but also offering to their athletes or players what sticks with them, the person they are, how they coach them, the support they choose to provide, and the advice they choose to share. All these things stay with athletes and players alike, like an imprint of what makes up a coach. Elements of a coach's pedagogy. And that is incredibly powerful and important. That really surmises everything I think we've been going over, even from imprinting, because it really sets the scene of what makes not an exceptional coach, but also just an elite coach with that ability to mentor tied into that, which is really summed up with their ability to support, to choose, to provide. All of these concise words are those behaviors, those actions that really are ingrained in us for the adults in the room. And if they're not ingrained, take the proactive steps to make that happen. Because at the end of the day, if your core objective is to move the marker, move that peak performance to the next peak performance and the next, because that's how we ascend and progress towards that next ranking milestone. If that is your objective, that coincides with your players, your athlete's objective, this is what it takes. A coaching pedagogy that incorporates these elite facets of play from the developmental level. And why it's so important, if you are capable of imprinting this, equipping a player and building a coaching pedagogy and sharing your these key facets of play from the earlier stages of development, you get to build on them and build on them and build on them over the next 10 years of play and potentially more, which means that you're moving the marker higher and higher and higher, so that rate of progress, it grows and grows and grows. Those, however, who start later at say 18, 19, 20, it means their peak is going to come slightly later. So it's okay for those of you who are listening who are at or included in the elite. You are currently professional, you're progressing or hope to progress with your rankings towards the top 40, top 30 and further. You have a head start with your ranking, but the plateau is your performance. You need to progress and move that marker, which obviously is possible here. You need to ensure your coach's pedagogy is inclusive of this. But the head start for the developmental players is that when they get to 18, 19 years of age, they're more likely to peak sooner opposed to later if you've integrated these patterns of play, but also they've been implementing in your coaching pedagogy, so it's a natural progression. And that aligns with the pathway to the long game, again available at AIMA International. But it's so fundamental when it comes to mentoring, and obviously that off-court proponent, it's tied to athlete success, cannot be underrated. And I think too often not that it is, that it's about what happens on the court, and what's off the court, it's not my problem from a coach's perspective. Now, it's so important for the coaches and athletes, players out there to be able to have those conversations off court, but also when it comes to that triangular relationship, to include that parent and or guardian. And when you're able to have those conducive conversations, that really builds a team, that team dynamic. Because I know tennis obviously is not viewed as a team sport, but let's look at it on that micro scale when we look at team from that parent and or guardian, that child, that player, that athlete, and the coach. When we're looking at that dynamic, so those involved, it's more conducive when available, when we're heading towards the long game, to have that support network, to have that mentoring element that is able to be leveraged when that player athlete is in need. And for those of you, again, who do not have that parent and or guardian they can leverage, so to speak, we've touched on that in the value of friendship, so to speak, and or fellow players at your club and or academy. So it's okay for those of you. It's really about building that dynamic in the best possible way, which means you've got your coaching pedagogy. It includes the 7 keys. You're conscious of that triangular relationship. You are conscious also of that power tussle, that it is reciprocal. It's balanced, so it's not overbearing on one side or the other. And you do have peak performance progressions. You've been working towards on court, and off court you're making yourself available as a mentor when or if not needed for your player and or athlete. And you're conscious of your role model status, so your level of influence. I think that sums up our key points here. And when we get to couple all of that together, which should be embedded in your coaching pedagogy. So recall when we look at those, your moral compass, what really sets the stage for your coaching practices, the 7 keys, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, really need to be in there if you're looking at obviously heading towards top 100, top 50, top 20, top 10. That's what it takes. So at the end of the day, mentoring, it's tied to athlete success. Of course, it's correlated with that top 10 tennis ranking and all those moving parts we've touched on in between. So again, top 10 tennis ranking, moving parts, Of course it's possible. We do have the data, but again, it's the humanized approach, that behavioral component we've really touched on today that really moves those metrics further, the performance closer, and I think that humanized element closer and closer and closer towards that top 10 tennis ranking. Thank you so much for listening today. I think that we had a really relaxed discussion, so to speak, to begin with. Then we really dived in and got a little bit complicated. Then we find it and then we summed it up, because there were so many moving parts today that I hope I haven't forgotten, but I'm sure if I have, I'm going to make sure they're included in the episode notes nonetheless. To grab a copy of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, head on over to AIM8 International. For any comments or questions, head to AIM8 International, that's aim8international.com, or Topic Thread, the only social network I'm on. But to interact with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, head on over to Twitter, Threads, LinkedIn, Instagram, or even TikTok to come and say hi. Please do. To catch up on our weekly coaching tips, head on over to TikTok. So they're also available on the other platforms on varying ways and or days, but primarily they have been available and are available on TikTok. And to catch up on our blogs, you can access them directly on our website under our news tabs, under our blogs tab, or head directly to Medium. Now you will see all the links in the episode notes, but they're also available at the bottom of AIM8 International and different pages, and on all of our social links they are there. For something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That's where my fictional release is. To view this week's question and poll, be sure to visit Spotify. I always try to put some different questions in there to get those thoughts. So if you have been participating, thank you so much. I love it. If not, that's okay, but don't be shy. They are completely private and they just add more value, so I can better shape episodes to what you're really after and maybe answer some of those questions along the way. For something different or a bit left of field, visit Sprout for some random polls. That's a bit of a side project, but again, I will leave all the links in the episode notes. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, and or all of the above would be absolutely phenomenal. And for those of you who are interested, we do have scholarships available at AIM8 International, or you might know someone that does. So that's always a bit of fun to share, and or we obviously have subscriptions available, so don't be shy. Come and have a peek at AIM8 International. I'm sure there's something there for you, and at the end of the day, don't be shy, just come and say hi. On that note, thank you so much for listening. I am so incredibly grateful. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.